Not acting like family anymore, my son said, like the words were a verdict he'd been rehearsing all morning. All I had done was tell him I couldn't drive his wife to her hair appointment on Saturday because I'd promised my old neighbor I'd take her to the eye doctor. That was it. One Saturday. One promise I'd already made to a 78-year-old widow who had nobody else. But by the time the sun went down, I was a stranger in the house I'd helped them buy. I was at the sink rinsing out a coffee mug when his name came up on my phone. Wesley. I let it ring twice before I dried my hands. He never called just to talk. Hadn't in years. Whenever his name lit up that screen, it meant somebody needed something. A ride, a check, an extra set of hands, a night of babysitting because the sitter canceled. I knew it the way you know the weather changing in your bones. Hey, Mom. No hello. No how are you. You free Saturday morning? Brielle's got that thing at the salon, and I've got the boys' soccer. Could use you to drive her over and bring her back. I told him I couldn't. I said it kindly. I told him I'd already promised Mrs. Pendergast next door. She'd had cataract surgery in May, and the follow-up was Saturday at 9:30. And her son lives in Tucson, and her daughter passed 3 years ago, and I had told her 2 weeks back that I'd take her. I said I was sorry. I told him Brielle could probably book an Uber, that the salon was only 15 minutes away. There was a silence on the line that I recognized, the kind of quiet my son uses when he's deciding which weapon to pick up. Wow, okay. I mean, Mrs. Pendergast over your own family. That's a choice. I tried to laugh the way you laugh when you don't know what else to do. I told him it wasn't a competition. I told him I'd be glad to take Brielle the following Saturday, or to pick the boys up from practice some weekday, or anything else. You know what? Never mind. Forget I asked. He hung up before I could say goodbye. I stood there in my kitchen for a long time, holding the phone the way you hold something that just bit you. My dish towel was still over my shoulder. The coffee mug was still in the drainer. Outside, the cardinals were at the feeder I keep filled on the back porch. Everything looked the same. Everything was the same. Except I had this flicker in my chest, this small bad feeling, like when you smell smoke and can't tell yet whether it's somebody's grill or your own house. 2 hours later, the text came. Mom, we need some space. Don't come by the house. We're rekeying the front and the side gate. Brielle's been saying for a while she needs better boundaries with you, and I think she's right. Don't make this harder than it has to be. I read it twice. Then a third time because I was sure I'd misunderstood. Rekeying the front. Don't come by the house. The house I had put $48,000 of my own money into when they bought it 6 years ago. The house I had hung curtains in. The house where my grandsons had taken their first steps on the rug I bought them at the outlet mall in Pigeon Forge. I didn't cry. I want you to know that. I didn't cry then. I sat down at the kitchen table and I looked at the salt shaker for a while. It's a little ceramic chicken my husband Lawrence bought me at a flea market in 1989, and I've kept it on that table for 37 years. Lawrence has been gone for 9 of those. And right then, sitting there with that text on my screen, I missed him so badly I thought my chest would crack open like a walnut. I got in my car. I told myself I just wanted to see for myself. I drove the 22 minutes to their house in Brentwood. The lawn was fresh mowed. There was a tricycle on its side near the porch. Tobias's, my older grandson's. Through the front window, I could see the lamp I'd given them last Christmas glowing in the living room. Somebody was home. I rang the doorbell. I waited. I rang it again. I saw the curtain move upstairs. Just a twitch, the way a cat will twitch its tail when it's pretending it doesn't see you. Then nothing. I tried my key. The same key I'd used 100 times. The brass one with the little blue cap I'd put on it so I wouldn't mix it up with my own house key. It went in halfway and stopped. Wouldn't turn. Wouldn't come back out easy either. I had to wiggle it free and walk back down the porch steps with it in my hand, like it was something somebody had asked me to return. I made it to my car before my knees went soft. I sat in the driver's seat and I laughed. I want to be honest about this. I sat there and I laughed for about a minute, and it wasn't a happy sound. It was the sound a person makes when something inside her finally gets the joke. I drove home with my hands at 10 and 2, like a teenager taking a road test, because I didn't trust myself to drive any other way. That night, I didn't eat. I sat on the living room couch with the TV off, and I let the dark come into the room. I thought about my husband. I thought about how Lawrence used to say, "Margaret, you are too soft with that boy. He's going to grow up thinking the world owes him an apology for inconveniencing him." And I would shush him because Wesley was our only child, and we'd waited so long for him, and he was a good boy mostly. He was. I still believe he was. But somewhere along the way, I had taught my son that my yes was the default and my no was a betrayal. I don't know exactly when. Maybe when his father got sick and I gave him 15,000 to put a down payment on his first condo so he wouldn't have to deal with that alongside his dad's diagnosis. Maybe earlier, when I paid for 2 years of his graduate school because his stipend wasn't enough. Maybe earlier still, when he was 12 and his father said no, he cannot have those expensive cleats, and I drove to the sporting goods store the next afternoon and bought them anyway. I had been paying my way into being needed for a long, long time. I just hadn't had the words for it until that night. The next morning, I made myself eat a piece of toast. I set my own kitchen timer to do it because I knew if I didn't, I would just sit there and let the day go by. Then I took out the gray plastic bin I kept in the bottom of my hall closet. The one labeled in my own handwriting, "Family. Keep." I worked 31 years as a paralegal. You don't do that without learning to keep records. Inside that bin were folders and folders of things. Carbon copies of checks. Bank statements with circles drawn around transfers. The HELOC paperwork I'd taken out in 2019 to help them with the second baby and the new roof. The check I wrote to Tobias's preschool for 2 years running because Bro wanted him at the Montessori place and her parents wouldn't help. Receipts from Pottery Barn for the nursery I had set up for them. The deposit on Wesley's wedding venue. That one was $9,000 by itself. I started making a list. Not because I was going to confront anybody with it. I think it was more that I needed to see, in my own handwriting, what I had given. Because somewhere along the line I had stopped being able to see it. It had blurred together into one big pile of what mothers do. I needed to take it apart and look at each piece. By lunchtime I had filled 4 pages of a yellow legal pad. The total at the bottom, and I checked it twice, was $186,400 over 14 years. Not counting groceries, not counting the times I gassed up Brielle's car when she was running short, not counting the 18 Christmases I'd hosted, the 4 Easters, the countless birthday parties. Not counting the time I drove across 3 states when she went into labor early with Tobias and Wesley, couldn't get a flight back from his work trip in time. And I sat in a hospital for 16 hours with her, holding her hand while she screamed at me that I was breathing too loud. $186,400, and a key in my purse that no longer opened the door. I picked up the phone and I called my old boss. Patrick Vandermeer had retired 3 years ago, but I knew he still kept a small practice for clients he liked. Estate work mostly. I knew because he'd sent me a Christmas card every year of the 11 years I'd worked at his firm, and the last one had said, "Margaret, if you ever need anything, you call me first. You hear?" I thought it was sweet at the time. I hadn't expected to need it. "Margaret Hollins, well, I'll be," he said when I got him on the line. His voice was a little rougher than I remembered. He was 81 now. "What's the trouble?" I told him. I tried to be brief. I told him about the rekeyed locks. I told him about the power of attorney I'd given Wesley 4 years back when I had my hip done, and I was worried about being out for a few weeks. I told him about my will, which named Wesley as the primary beneficiary of everything, including the house I'd lived in since 1981, the one his father and I had paid off the year before Lawrence passed. Patrick listened. He didn't interrupt. When I was done, he said, "Margaret, come see me Monday. 9 o'clock. Bring everything you've got." I sat there at the kitchen table after we hung up. I could feel my heart in my throat, the way it gets when you've made a decision before your brain has fully caught up. I wasn't going to disinherit my son in a fit of rage. I knew myself better than that, but I wasn't going to leave the will the way it was either. Not anymore. Not after that key wouldn't turn. The weekend was the longest weekend I can remember. I kept expecting Wesley to call, or Brielle. even just an email. I checked my phone so often I started leaving it in the other room on purpose. Saturday morning, I drove Mrs. Pendergast to her appointment, and we got pancakes after at the Cracker Barrel on Old Hickory. She wore her Sunday earrings even though it was just an eye doctor. She kept thanking me. She said, "Margaret, I don't know what I'd do without you." And I had to look out the window for a minute because that was the exact thing my son used to say to me back when he was 30 and broke and grateful, and I couldn't remember the last time he'd said it and meant it. Sunday I went to church. The pastor was preaching on the prodigal son, and I had to leave during the second hymn because I couldn't take it. I sat in my car in the parking lot until the service ended, and then I drove home and I made myself a turkey sandwich. I was 67 years old and I was hiding from a sermon. I was so tired. It surprised me how tired I was. Monday morning, I drove to Patrick's office downtown. He had moved out of the big firm into a small place above a tax preparer on Damon Brune Street. He had a single secretary, a coffee maker, and a window that looked out over the parking lot. He hugged me when I came in. He hadn't done that in all the years I'd worked for him. I don't think he was sure he should now either, but he did it anyway. We sat down at Dar. I gave him my legal pad and the yellow folder I'd filled with copies. He read for almost 20 minutes without saying a word. Then he took off his glasses and he looked at me. "Margaret, the first thing we're doing is revoking that power of attorney. Today, right now. I'll fax it before you leave this office. Your son has access to your retirement accounts under that document. Did you know that?" I told him I'd forgotten. "He hasn't touched them, near as I can tell from these statements. But that's a door we're closing, today." I nodded. "The will. I'd recommend we redo it from scratch rather than amend. Cleaner. Tell me who you want to leave things to." I had thought about this all weekend. I told him I wanted my grandsons, Tobias and Bryce, to receive education trusts, with the funds locked until they were 22 and only payable for tuition or living expenses while in school. I didn't want Wesley or Brielle to have any access to those funds. None. Patrick wrote it down. I told him the rest of the estate, the house, the savings, what was left of Lawrence's pension survivor benefits, my own 401k from the firm. I wanted that split between two recipients. The first was my younger sister Glenna, who lived in Asheville and had MS and had not asked me for a dime in 30 years. The second was the public library system in our county. They had been the first place I worked, summers in high school. They had hired Lawrence as a janitor when he was between jobs in 1976, and he'd told me ever after that they'd saved his pride. Patrick wrote it all down. He read it back to me. He asked twice if I was sure. I told him I was. I told him I had been signing checks to my son for 14 years and he had thanked me by changing the locks. Patrick said, "Margaret, I want you to take the rest of the day. Go home. Eat something. Sleep on it. If you still feel this way Wednesday, come back and we sign." I told him I would, and I did go home. I did eat. I did try to sleep. And on Wednesday morning, I drove back to that little office on Demon Brun, and I signed every page he put in front of me. The new will. The revocation of power of attorney. A separate document instructing my bank to remove Wesley as a signer on my checking account, which I had added him to in 2018 when I was hospitalized for pneumonia and we thought I might not come home. Patrick had me initial each page. When we were done, he stood up and he said, "I've been doing this work for 53 years. The hardest cases I've ever had aren't the divorces. They're the mothers. Every time." I drove home and I sat on the back porch and I watched the cardinals at the feeder. I had done a thing I could not undo. I felt strange. I felt clean. I felt afraid. All of it at once. I called the bank that afternoon and I canceled the recurring transfer that had gone out of my checking account on the first of every month for 6 years. $600. Tobias's enrichment. Brielle had called it when she'd asked me to set it up. Music classes, tumbling, a Spanish tutor on Tuesdays. I had never missed a month. I'd never been thanked for one of them either. The young man on the phone asked me if I was sure I wanted to cancel. I told him yes. He asked if I wanted to leave a note in the system explaining the cancellation in case my family asked. I said yes. Funds are no longer available. Let them make of that what they would. The phone call from Brielle came on Thursday afternoon. I almost didn't answer, but I did. Margaret? Hi. So, there's been some kind of mix-up with the transfer this month? It didn't come through, and Tobias has piano on Saturday, and I just wanted to make sure everything's okay on your end. She didn't say anything about the locks. She didn't say we changed our locks 4 days ago, and I'm sorry. She didn't say Wesley's been a wreck about this. She said mix-up. I told her there was no mix-up. I told her calmly that I had canceled the transfer. Oh. Oh, okay. Did you and Wesley talk about this? I told her no. I told her I had made the decision myself. I told her that, since I was no longer welcome in their home, I felt it was no longer appropriate for me to be funding the household. I said it the way Patrick had coached me to say it. Plain. No barbs. No tears. There was a long pause on her end, and then she said the thing I will probably remember the rest of my life. She said, Margaret, we didn't mean for it to affect the boys. The boys. Not me. The boys. The money, she meant. She wanted me to understand that whatever Cold War her husband had started was supposed to be a Cold War between the adults. The grandchildren's enrichment fund was supposed to keep flowing. The locks on the door were one thing. The pipeline of cash was another. I told her I understood her perfectly, and I hung up. I want to tell you that I felt powerful right then. I didn't. I went into the bedroom, and I lay down on the bedspread Lawrence and I had picked out at Sears in 1992, and I cried for the first time since the text. I cried for my grandsons, who were going to find out, eventually, that something had happened between their grandmother and their parents, and that nobody was going to explain it to them honestly. I cried for the woman I had been at 35, when Wesley was 9 and the whole world was my boy's smile, when I picked him up from school. I cried for Lawrence, who had tried to warn me, gently, for years, that I was going to break my own heart. The week after, Wesley showed up at my door. He didn't call first. Just rang the bell at 6:30 on a Tuesday evening. I let him stand on the porch for a few seconds before I opened it, and I will admit there was a part of me that thought, now you know how it feels. He looked tired. He looked older than 39. He had shaved badly, and there was a coffee stain on his collar. Mom. I stepped aside. I let him come in. He sat on the couch where he had napped 1,000 times as a teenager. I sat in Lawrence's old recliner across from him. Brielle told me you canceled the transfer. I did, and Patrick Vandermeer's office sent some kind of certified letter to the house about a power of attorney. I haven't even opened it yet. You should open it. He rubbed his face. Mom. Look, Brielle and I. We've been under a lot of stress. The house, the kids, her job. She's not even sleeping. And I think she just hit a point where she needed some distance. The locks thing. That wasn't aimed at you. It was just, we should have communicated better. I get that. But you're escalating this into something it doesn't need to be. He kept talking. I let him. I noticed he never once said the word sorry. Not once. He said we should have communicated better, which is the kind of thing you say when you don't want to admit you did anything. He said I understand you were upset, which is the kind of thing that puts the upset on me, not on him. He said I think we all need to take a step back, which I had heard him say to clients on the phone when his work was going poorly. When he finished, I looked at him for a while. I looked at my son. I looked at the boy I'd nursed for 14 months because he wouldn't take a bottle. I looked at the teenager I had taught to drive in the empty Walmart parking lot. I looked at the man who had stood next to me at his father's funeral and held my hand so tight I had a bruise the next day. I told him I loved him. I told him I would always love him. And then I told him I was not going to be his mother and his bank at the same time anymore. I told him he could come and visit. He could call. He could bring my grandsons over for an afternoon, and I would always have the door open. But he could not come and ask me for things. Not money. Not favors. Not Saturday mornings. He could come because he wanted to see me. And if he didn't want to see me unless he needed something, then he didn't really want to see me. He stood up. He said, "Mom, I think you're really going to regret this." I told him maybe I would. But I told him I had already regretted the other way for 14 years, and I didn't have another 14 to spare. He left. He didn't slam the door, which I noted. He closed it quietly. I think part of him knew. The house was very still after he'd gone. I sat in Lawrence's chair and I watched the light go down through the back windows, and I thought, well, there it is. There's the worst of it, except it wasn't the worst of it, because 3 days later I got a call from my older grandson Tobias, who is 8, on his mother's phone. He whispered into it like he was hiding under a bed. "Grammy? Hi, baby. I'm here. Mommy says we can't come to your house anymore. Is that true?" I sat down on the edge of the kitchen counter. Slow. I told him that wasn't true. I told him that his Grammy's house would always be his house too, and that his mom and dad and I were having a grown-up disagreement, but that none of it was about him or about Bryce. I told him I loved him. I told him I missed him. I asked him about his soccer team. He talked for maybe 2 minutes. Then I heard Brielle's voice in the background, sharp, and the line went dead. I stood there in my kitchen, and something in me that had been very straight and very firm for 2 weeks bent a little. Not broken, but bent. I called my sister Glenna that night. I hadn't talked to her in 7 months. I told her everything. She let me cry for a long time on her end, the way only a sister can. And then she said, "Maggie, come stay with me for a while. Come up here. Get out of that house. Get out of that town. Come see the mountains." I had not been to North Carolina in 9 years. Not since Lawrence's last good summer. I packed a suitcase and I drove the 7 hours to Asheville, and I stayed with Glenna for 3 weeks. Her little house is on a slope above a creek, and she has 2 old dogs who slept on my feet at night. We didn't talk about Wesley most days. We talked about our mother, who had been gone for 22 years. We talked about the summers we'd spent at our aunt's house in Murphy when we were girls. We watched bad television and we made cornbread in our mother's iron skillet that Glenna had inherited. One afternoon, Glenna's neighbor came by, a woman about my age named Irene, retired school teacher, and the 3 of us sat on Glenna's porch and shelled peas for 2 hours. Nobody asked me what was wrong. Nobody asked me to be anything other than the woman shelling peas. I cannot tell you how long it had been since I had been allowed to just exist somewhere without a job to do for somebody. When I drove home, I felt different, not healed. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to lie to you. I was not healed. I am not healed now, even as I'm telling you this, but I felt like a person again. I felt like Margaret, not Wesley's mother, not the boy's Grammy, not Brielle's bank, just Margaret Hollins, 67 years old, of Davidson County, Tennessee, with a husband in the ground and a sister in the mountains, and 2 grandsons she missed every minute of every day. There is more to tell. There always is, I'm finding. Some of it is good. About a month after I got back from Glenna's, my grandson Tobias's 8th-grade teacher, wait, no, 3rd grade, he's only 8, wrote me a letter. An actual letter on lined notebook paper. He'd asked her to mail it for him because he didn't know my address, only my name in town. The teacher had figured the rest out. The letter said, "Dear Grammy, I miss your peach cobbler, and I miss when you let me hold the hose to water the tomatoes. Mom says you got mad at us, but I don't think that's true. I love you. Love, Toby." I framed that letter. I have it on the wall by the back door now, where I see it every time I go out to fill the bird feeder. Some of it has not been good. Wesley and I haven't spoken in 11 months. He sent me a Christmas card with the boy's picture on it, but no note inside. I sent one back with a note inside that said, "I love you. The door is open, Mom." He has not responded. I don't know if he will. Brielle has not contacted me at all. I think she will not. I think I represent something to her now that she would rather not look at directly, and I have made my peace with that, mostly. But what I want to tell you, the reason I'm telling any of this, and I know this is long, and I know I've gone past where I should have stopped, is this. I spent 14 years buying my son's love, one transfer at a time, and the day I stopped, he changed the locks on me in less than 4 hours. That is not a relationship. That was a transaction. And the worst thing about it is that I was the one who had taught him it was a transaction. Every time I said yes when I should have said no. Every time I wrote a check I couldn't really afford. Every time I canceled my own plans for his. When I finally said one small no one Saturday, I owed an old woman next door, the whole thing fell apart. Because there was nothing else holding it together. There hadn't been for a long time. I am 67 years old. I have, God willing, a few more years. I am going to spend them differently. I am going to drive my neighbor to her doctor's appointments. I am going to visit my sister. I am going to volunteer at the library on Tuesdays. I started a month ago, and the children's librarian cried when I offered. I am going to cook for one. I am going to write letters to my grandsons that they may not get for another 10 years, when they are old enough to find me on their own. I am going to leave my house and my savings to people who never asked me for them. And if my son comes home the way the boy in that pastor's sermon came home, I will meet him at the door. I will. But I will not run down the road to find him. I have been running down that road my whole life, and my legs are tired. And there is a cardinal at my feeder, and a mug in my drainer, and my husband's old chair behind me, and I have just about everything I need. If you've made it this far, and you felt yourself in any of what I've said, I want you to know you are not crazy. You are not selfish. The first no is the hardest. The second one is easier. By the 10th, you will start to recognize yourself again. I promise you that. Take care of yourselves. Take care of each other. And don't wait as long as I did. I've been turning this over in my mind for almost a year now. And I think I finally understand what happened to me. Not all of it. Some of it I may never untangle. But the part I can see clearly is this. For 14 years, every time I wrote my son a check, every time I dropped what I was doing to drive across town for him, every time I swallowed my own no and gave him a yes, I couldn't really afford. I was teaching him something. I thought I was teaching him love. I was teaching him that my life was negotiable and his was not. Cause and effect. He didn't change the locks on me out of nowhere. He changed them because I had spent 14 years showing him that there were no locks. That my door, my wallet, my Saturdays, my body, my time on this earth, none of it had a door at all. So when I finally put one up, he had no idea what to do except pretend he couldn't see me through it. I wish I had understood sooner. I wish someone had taken my hand the year Wesley turned 25 and told me, plain, that there is a difference between being a generous mother and being a self-erasing one. The first one raises a man. The second one raises a customer. If you are watching this and you see yourself in any corner of what I've said, I want you to hear me on 3 things. The first is your goodness. Don't let this story or any story make you think that being kind and giving was a mistake. Margaret Hollins was a good mother. She is still a good mother. The mistake wasn't the giving. The mistake was forgetting that I was a person who could also be given to. Goodness with no edges is just self-harm with better manners. The second is your mind. Look at your records. Look at the actual numbers. Look at the actual hours. I had to spread 14 years of paper across my kitchen table to see what my heart had been refusing to add up. Don't be afraid of clear eyes. Clear eyes saved me. They will save you too. The third is your nerve. The first no is going to feel like the end of the world. It is not. It is the beginning of a smaller world that is actually yours. I drove an old neighbor to her eye doctor that Saturday. That little no, that was the first piece of my life I had taken back in a long, long time. And once I'd taken back one piece, I found I could take back another, and another. The nerve grows. I promise you that. You don't need to find courage for the whole road, just for the next step. Wesley may come back. He may not. I have stopped organizing my days around either possibility. I have peach cobbler to bake for a grandson who will find me when he can. I have a sister in the mountains. I have a cardinal at my feeder. And I have, finally, a door that opens from the inside.